She had been standing at the kitchen counter opening the mail when he said it. 6 years of marriage. A Tuesday evening in November. The specific, ordinary domesticity of a woman in her own kitchen in the home she had bought before he had a dollar to his name. And the words landed with the flat, devastating precision of something that had been building for a long time and had finally found its way out. And she set down the envelope she was holding and looked at her husband across the kitchen, and felt something she had not expected to feel, which was not hurt exactly, not anger exactly, but the cold and clarifying recognition of a woman who has just been handed the full and final measure of how little she has been seen, and she was still holding that recognition, still standing in that specific stillness. When his phone rang and the voice on the other end said the words "Your accounts have been frozen," and the kitchen went so quiet she could hear the November wind against the window. And she thought, of all the moments, of all the possible moments for the floor to go. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. I am Mr. Zaha. Thanks for tuning in today. A kind words from a man who has seen it all. Marriage are not mostly bed of roses. Sometime you need more of. More of what? Can't say. Continue watching, and you will surely know what to do in situations like this. Kindly hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So let's get started. Chicago in November was the city at its most honest. The lake effect came in from Michigan with the specific, uncompromising authority of weather that has crossed open water and built momentum and has no intention of moderating itself for the comfort of the people in its path. And the city received it the way Chicago received everything, directly, without excessive complaint, with the particular stoic grace of a place that has been built and rebuilt by people who understood that difficulty was not an interruption of real life, but a condition of it. Nadia Okafor had always loved Chicago in November. She had come here at 23 from Cincinnati, with a finance degree from Ohio State and the specific, focused ambition of a woman who had grown up watching her mother work 2 jobs and had decided before she was old enough to articulate it that she would build something solid enough that no one in her family would ever have to work 2 jobs again. She had started at a mid-sized investment advisory firm on Wacker Drive as a junior analyst, had worked with the focused, unhurried thoroughness of someone who understood that competence compounded the way interest compounded, and had been, by 30, the youngest senior portfolio manager in the firm's history. She was 34 now. She was the managing director. This was not a secret. It was simply a fact that her husband, Dylan Mercer, had filed in the cabinet where he kept things that were true, but that complicated the story he was telling himself, which was the cabinet. Nadia had come to understand where most of their marriage's structural problems lived. The house on North Burling Street in Lincoln Park had been hers since she was 28. A 1920s graystone, 4 bedrooms, original woodwork, a garden level that she had converted into a home office in the first year, the kitchen renovated the second year with the specific, personal attention of a woman who cooks seriously and knows what a kitchen needs to work. She had saved for 3 years for the down payment with the same disciplined, systematic approach she applied to her clients' portfolios, and she had closed on it on a Thursday in October and had stood in the empty living room with the original hardwood floors and the plaster crown molding and the November light coming through the tall east windows, and she had thought, in the complete and wordless way you think things that are simply true, "This is mine. I built this." Dylan had moved in when they married. He had never asked about the mortgage. She had assumed, for 6 years, that this was because he trusted her management of it. She was understanding, gradually, and with the specific discomfort of a woman who does not like being wrong about people she loves, that it was because he had never thought to ask, had filed the house in the same cabinet as her professional accomplishments, under the heading of Nadia's things, which was a category that lived in his mental architecture adjacent to but separate from our life, which was the category he considered his domain, his construction, the thing he had brought to the marriage. Dylan Mercer was 37 and was, in the specific, accomplished way of a certain kind of Chicago man, genuinely successful. He was a senior vice president at Meridian Capital Group, a private equity firm headquartered in the Loop, where he had worked for 9 years and built a real career with real results and the specific confidence of a man who has earned his position and knows it. He was good-looking in the particular, angular way that photographs well in professional headshots, and he had the easy, dominant social energy of someone who had always been the most professionally significant person in most rooms and had organized his sense of self around that position with the thoroughness of someone who doesn't realize they're doing it until the position is threatened. He had not, when he married Nadia, been less successful than she was. He was now. Not dramatically, not in the way that produced obvious, dramatic friction. Dylan was still a senior VP at a significant firm. He still earned well. He still occupied, in every external measure, the position of a successful man. But Nadia had become, in the 6 years of their marriage, something that had outgrown the category of successful and moved into something that required a different word. Consequential, perhaps, or foundational, the kind of professional presence that a city like Chicago produces when it finds someone with the right combination of intelligence and discipline and genuine care for the work. Dylan had watched this happen. He had said the right things about it, had been proud, had celebrated her promotions, had told people at dinner parties about his wife's accomplishments with the warm, slightly performative generosity of a man who wants credit for being secure enough to celebrate a successful woman. He had not been secure. He had been performing security while storing the insecurity in the cabinet, and the cabinet, after 6 years, had gotten full. Nadia had noticed. This was the thing about being a portfolio manager for 11 years. You developed, unavoidably, an eye for the small indicators that preceded significant movements, the micro-signals that preceded macro events, the way a position starts to shift before it shifts visibly. She had been watching the micro-signals in her marriage for 2 years with the same analytical attention she brought to her work, and she had been trying, with genuine, patient effort, to address what she was seeing. She had suggested couples therapy 8 months ago. Dylan had said they didn't need it. She had told him, 6 months ago, that she felt a distance growing between them that she wanted to close before it became structural. He had said she was overthinking. She had told him, 3 months ago, in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, that she needed him to talk to her honestly about what was happening between them, because she could feel something building and she did not want to be standing on the wrong side of it when it arrived. He had said everything was fine. Everything, as of a Tuesday evening in November, was not fine. She had been at her desk at the firm until 7. A client review that had run long, the particular, absorbing work of managing significant assets through a volatile fourth quarter, the kind of work that required her complete attention and received it. She had texted Dylan at 6:30, running late, home by 7:30, I'll make dinner. He had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. She had driven home through the November dark, the lake wind pushing against the car on Lakeshore Drive, Chicago doing what it did in November, and she had thought about the client meeting and the portfolio adjustments and the Q1 projections, and she had also thought, as she thought most evenings on the drive home, about her marriage, about the distance that Dylan kept saying wasn't there, about the cabinet she could feel getting full, about the specific, low-level tension that had been living in their house for months like a weather system that hadn't broken yet. She had pulled into the garage. She had come in through the side door. She had found Dylan already home, sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of bourbon and the specific, coiled quality of a man who has been sitting with something for a while and has decided tonight is the night he says it. She had set down her bag. She had gone to the counter to sort through the mail. The ordinary, domestic gesture of a woman coming home. The habit of 11 years of her own household. She had picked up an envelope from the Chicago Community Foundation, where she sat on the board, a routine correspondence. And Dylan had said, I know why you married me, Nadia. She had set the envelope down. She had turned. She had looked at her husband across the kitchen, across 6 years and the house she had bought, and the career she had built, and the therapy she had suggested, and the Sunday morning conversation he had called overthinking, and she had felt the cold, clarifying thing move through her. Do you? She said. The timing, he said. When we met. You were building your career, and you needed a certain kind of credibility. A certain kind of. Say it plainly, Dylan, she said. He looked at her. You needed what my name and my position gave you, he said. In this city. In these circles. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I think the marriage was a professional calculation. The kitchen was very quiet. Nadia looked at her husband. She looked at him with the full, steady, undeflectable gaze of a woman who has been seen wrongly by the person who should know her best and is absorbing the full size of it, the accusation, the 6 years it had apparently been building. The specific insult of being told that the love she had brought to her marriage was a business transaction. She opened her mouth. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. He frowned. He answered. She watched his expression change, watched the coiled, accusatory energy of 30 seconds ago drain out of his face and be replaced by something she had never seen there before, something that was not quite fear, but was in the same family. "What do you mean frozen?" he said. "All of them." The kitchen was very quiet. Nadia looked at the envelope in her hand. She set it down on the counter with the careful, precise attention of a woman who is noting the exact coordinates of a moment she will need to find her way back to. Then she waited. 6 years. A Tuesday evening. An accusation and a phone call, 30 seconds apart. Drop a comment right now. Tell me you felt that kitchen go quiet. Tell me you're here for every word of what comes next. The call lasted 11 minutes. Nadia knew because she was standing at the kitchen counter when it started and she was still standing at the kitchen counter when it ended. And she had counted, not obsessively, not with the frantic internal arithmetic of a woman managing panic, but with the deliberate, present attention of someone who has decided to experience a moment completely rather than retreat from it. And the moment took 11 minutes, and she used every one of them. She did not move. She did not make tea, did not check her phone, did not perform the busyness of a woman giving her husband privacy by pretending to have somewhere else to be. She stood at the counter with the mail in front of her, and she listened to the half of the conversation she could hear, and she assembled, from Dylan's side of it alone, a complete enough picture of what was happening to know that the next several hours were going to require everything she had. Dylan's voice moved through phases. The first phase was disbelief. The clipped, precise questions of a man who has received information that does not compute and is testing it from multiple angles, looking for the error. All three. When? What do you mean a regulatory hold? The voice of someone who has never had a floor go before and does not yet have the vocabulary for it. The second phase was controlled alarm, the register dropping, the questions becoming more specific, more technical, the voice of a VP at a private equity firm who is now in professional mode, who is treating this as a problem to be solved rather than an event to be survived. Who initiated the hold? What's the compliance basis? I need to speak to. The third phase was the one Nadia had been waiting for, had been able to feel coming from the quality of his silence between questions. The phase where the controlled alarm met the limit of what control could manage, and something rawer showed through, brief and unguarded. The voice of a man standing on ground that has moved and understanding that moving ground does not respond to professionalism. How long, he said. And then, after a pause, all of them. You're certain? He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen with his phone in his hand. He did not look at Nadia for a long moment. She waited. It's a regulatory hold, he said finally. His voice had the specific, careful quality of a man packaging information for delivery. The professional wrapper around the thing, the VP register doing its work even now, even here, even in his own kitchen on a Tuesday evening with the accusation he had just made still in the air between them like something neither of them had opened a window for. Meridian, he said. The SEC has opened a preliminary inquiry into one of the funds. The one I manage. He paused. Standard procedure when there's an inquiry. All associated personal accounts get flagged pending the investigation. Are you the subject of the inquiry? Nadia said. No. Immediate. Certain. It's fund level. The compliance team says it's about a transaction from 18 months ago that involved a counterparty that has since come under regulatory scrutiny. I wasn't. It's not about my conduct. But because I'm the managing VP, my personal accounts are associated. How long does a hold typically last? He looked at her. The look of a man registering that his wife is asking the right questions in the right order and is doing so with the calm, analytical fluency of a professional who knows this territory. And the registering of this is complicated for him in ways he is not, right now, equipped to fully process. Weeks, he said. Could be months if the inquiry escalates. All three accounts. Checking, savings, and the brokerage. He set the phone down on the island. The Meridian account is obviously separate. That's the firm's. But my personal brokerage is frozen. He paused. Everything liquid is frozen. Nadia looked at him. She looked at him across the kitchen, across the accusation and the phone call and the specific, loaded silence of the last 11 minutes. And she conducted the swift, honest inventory of a woman who has been managing risk for 11 years and knows what exposure looks like. His exposure was significant. She knew his financial picture with the comprehensive clarity of a woman who managed other people's money for a living and had, over 6 years of marriage, absorbed the shape of her husband's finances the way you absorb the shape of a person you live with, not through formal examination, but through the accumulated ordinary information of a shared life. She knew his monthly obligations. She knew his investment positions. She knew that his lifestyle, which was the lifestyle of a senior VP at a private equity firm in Lincoln Park, was calibrated to his income in a way that left comfortable but not extraordinary reserves. Reserves that were now frozen. She did the math in the time it took him to pick up his bourbon glass and set it back down without drinking. "Dylan," she said. He looked at her. "How much do you have in cash that isn't in those accounts?" A pause. The pause told her. "About 4,000, he said. "In my wallet and a small account I use for. It was just for incidentals. I didn't think." "Your mortgage payment comes out of the frozen checking," she said. He was quiet. "On the 15th, he said. "The 15th is in 10 days, she said. He looked at the counter. She looked at him. And here was the moment. The specific, loaded, consequential moment that she had not planned and had not engineered, and which had arrived with the particular, unasked for clarity of something that simply happens and asks you who you are by how you respond to it. Her husband had accused her, 11 minutes ago, of marrying him for money. He was now standing in her kitchen, the kitchen of her house, the house with her name on the deed, the house whose mortgage came out of the account she had opened before he existed in her life, with $4,000 to his name and a frozen financial picture and the specific, exposed vulnerability of a man who has lost the floor he was standing on when he made the accusation. She had options. She was a woman of considerable financial means and excellent credit and a brokerage account that was not frozen and a house that was paid, essentially, by her own resources, had always been, though she had never said this plainly because she had not wanted to make it a point of leverage, had wanted their shared life to feel shared rather than scored. She had options that ranged from the devastating to the generous and every point between, and she was standing at the counter with 11 years of risk assessment experience and the full knowledge of where she stood. She made her decision in the time it took the November wind to push against the kitchen window. Not the generous option, not the devastating one, the honest one. "Sit down, Dylan," she said. He looked at her, with the expression she had not seen before, the one that had appeared when the floor went, the unmanaged expression of a man who does not know what is coming and does not have the ground to stand on while he waits to find out. He sat at the island. She stayed standing, not to establish dominance. She was not a woman who needed architectural advantages for that, but because she needed to be able to move, and what she was about to do required movement, required the physical engagement of a woman doing something that mattered with her hands. She went to the refrigerator. She took out the things for dinner. She began to cook. This was not performance. This was Nadia, the woman who cooked seriously, who had renovated this kitchen because she knew what a kitchen needed to work, who had learned from her mother that the most honest conversations happen when someone's hands are busy with something real. She cooked and she talked. "I'm going to tell you some things," she said. "And I need you to sit there and hear them without interrupting, because I have been patient for a long time, and I am going to spend the patience now all at once, and I need you to receive it." Dylan was very still at the island. "Okay," he said. She kept her eyes on the pan. "I was 22 years old when I opened my first brokerage account," she said. "I had $900 in it. I had just started at the firm, and I was making $41,000 a year, and I put $100 a month into that account for 3 years before I had enough to feel like it was real." She kept her voice even, not cold, not hot, the specific register of a woman stating facts that carry weight precisely because they are facts and not arguments. "My mother worked the front desk at a medical office and cleaned houses on the weekends. My father left when I was 9. There was no money behind me. There was no account, no family investment, no net. I built from zero." She moved the pan. "I bought this house at 28 with a down payment I saved over 3 years," she said. "In my name. With my money. The mortgage is managed from an account that has been mine since before I met you." She paused. "Not because I was hiding it. Because I built it before you, and it was mine, and I loved you enough to share it without making it a transaction." The kitchen was very quiet. "When we met," she said, "you were a senior associate at Meridian. You had not yet been promoted to VP. Your name in Chicago private equity circles was respectable and developing. She looked at him directly now, set down the spoon, turned, held his eyes across the island. I was a senior portfolio manager managing $400 million in client assets. I was in the room with the people whose names opened doors in this city. I was the credibility, Dylan, not you. He held her gaze. She watched it move through him. The full, restructuring weight of it. The specific and uncomfortable arrival of a fact that did not fit the story and could not be made to fit. The fact sitting in the middle of the story and asking the story to rebuild around it. I married you, she said, because you stood at the window at the Kovacs Gallery opening on a February evening and you looked at a painting for 4 full minutes without checking your phone, and I thought, that man is actually present. That man actually sees things. Her voice was level and entirely honest, and underneath the level and the honest was the thing she was not going to perform but could not fully keep out of her voice. The love, the real and inconvenient and persistent love of a woman for a man who had just accused her of not having it. I married you because you made me laugh before you made me impressed, and because you called my mother on her birthday without being asked, and because you are, underneath all of this, she gestured, a small, comprehensive gesture that encompassed the kitchen and the island and the bourbon glass and the frozen accounts and the accusation. A good man who has gotten lost in a story that was never true. She picked up the spoon. She turned back to the pan. So no, she said. I did not marry you for money. I married you for the man I thought I knew. She paused. The question you need to sit with tonight, the one I need you to answer honestly, and not tomorrow, but right now, is why you needed to believe that I did. The kitchen held them both in its amber light. The food was cooking. The November wind was at the window. Dylan Mercer sat at the island of the house that was not his and had never been and looked at his wife who had built it and looked at the bourbon glass he had not drunk from and looked at his hands flat on the marble counter and sat with the question she had given him the way you sit with something that is going to cost you before it can help you. Nadia cooked. She let the silence do the work that silence does when the right question has been asked in the right room. She waited. She could have walked out. She could have let him drown in his own frozen accounts. She cooked dinner instead. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what that choice says about her. Tell me if you think he deserves the dinner. Dylan did not answer her that night. Not because he was refusing. She could see that clearly, could read the difference between a man declining to answer and a man genuinely sitting with a question that is larger than his immediate capacity to answer it honestly. And what she saw in her husband at the kitchen island was the second thing. He sat with it. He ate the dinner she cooked. Pasta with the roasted tomato sauce she made from scratch when she needed to think. The specific, meditative work of it. The smell filling the kitchen with the warm authority of something real. And he was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. The quiet of a man who has run out of the specific kind of noise he had been making and found, in the absence of it, something he was not sure what to do with yet. She did not push. This was her discipline, the same discipline she applied to volatile portfolios, the understanding that some processes needed time and that forcing resolution before it was ready produced worse outcomes than waiting for the natural movement of things. She had asked the question. She had meant it. She was prepared to wait for the answer that was worth having rather than accept the answer that was merely fast. They cleaned up together in the kitchen, the ordinary, domestic choreography of two people who have done this for 6 years, who know each other's movements in this space well enough to navigate without collision, and the ordinariness of it was its own kind of information. The way ordinary things are always information if you're paying the right kind of attention. She went to bed at 10:30. He was still at the island when she left the kitchen. She did not ask him to come to bed. She did not perform the concerned wife, the waiting wife, the wife who needs her husband to process on her timeline rather than his own. She was Nadia Okafor, and she had been building things from the ground since she was 22 years old, and she had learned a long time ago that the most important things you build require you to let them take the time they take. She read for 40 minutes. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark in the bedroom of the house she had bought at 28, and she felt, fully and without management, in the privacy of the dark, the weight of the evening. Not the freeze, not the professional complications, not the practical exposure that her financial brain had already mapped and was already quietly organizing responses to. The other weight. The weight of 6 years and a Tuesday evening accusation and the specific, personal cost of being told by the person who should know you best that the love you brought was a calculation. She felt it. She gave it the time it deserved. Then she organized it. Not suppressed it. Organized it. The way she organized difficult information, putting it in the right category, which was not the category of things to survive, but the category of things to understand, because she had decided years ago that understanding was more useful than surviving and more honest than either. She was almost asleep when she heard him come to bed. He lay down beside her in the dark. He did not touch her. She did not turn toward him. But he said, quietly, into the darkness between them, "I don't know why yet, but I'm going to find out." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. And they lay in the dark, 2 feet apart, in the specific, loaded quiet of a marriage that is cracked open and is waiting to find out what it's made of underneath. Wednesday arrived with the full, indifferent efficiency of a city that does not pause for personal difficulty. Nadia was at her desk at Mercer Financial by 7:45. She had moved from the advisory firm 3 years ago to found her own, which was a fact Dylan knew and had celebrated and had filed in the cabinet. And she moved through her morning with the focused, productive attention of a woman who understands that her clients' financial lives do not reorganize themselves around her personal ones. By 9, she had returned 6 emails and reviewed the overnight market movement and had a 30-minute call with a client in Seattle about his Q4 positioning. By 10, she had done the thing she had been thinking about since the kitchen counter the night before. The thing that was not strategy and not revenge and not even, precisely, generosity, but the specific, honest action of a woman who has decided that the clearest thing she can do right now is make the truth visible. She called her accountant. His name was Robert Tate, 61, a Chicago man who had been managing Nadia's books since she started the firm, meticulous and discreet in the way of professionals who understand that their value is not merely technical but relational. She trusted him the way she trusted her best analysts, completely, on the basis of demonstrated evidence. "Robert," she said, "I need a full financial summary. Everything. The firm's position, my personal accounts, the house valuation, the investment portfolio." She paused. "I need it formatted clearly. Something a non-financial person can read and understand completely." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Complete disclosure document," he said. "Yes. Can I ask the purpose?" "My husband needs to understand what he married," she said. A brief pause. "I'll have it to you by end of day," Robert said. Dylan called at 11:15. She was between meetings, the specific, narrow window of 8 minutes between a client call and an internal portfolio review, and she answered because she had decided, in the dark the night before, that she was not going to perform unavailability. She was not a woman who used her schedule as a weapon. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. "How's your morning?" "Productive," she said. "Yours?" A pause that carried the specific weight of a man whose morning has been the opposite of productive, who has been sitting with something since last night and has been carrying it through a workday that requires him to be the senior VP, to be competent and decisive and present, while simultaneously being a man who said something to his wife at a kitchen counter that he cannot unsay and is now living in the space created by the unsaying. "I've been thinking," he said. "I know," she said. "Can we tonight? Can we talk tonight? Actually talk?" "Yes," she said. "I'll be home by 7. "I'll make dinner," he said. She paused. "Okay," she said. She ended the call. She sat for a moment at her desk with her phone in her hand and looked at the Chicago skyline through the office window. The gray November sky and the lake just visible between the buildings. The city going about its Wednesday with the particular, productive stoicism of a place that had been built by people who worked. She thought about Dylan making dinner. He cooked rarely. Not because he couldn't, but because the kitchen had, over 6 years, become hers in the way that spaces become a person's when they are used with consistent, genuine investment. He made eggs on Sunday mornings sometimes. He grilled in summer. He had made her birthday dinner twice in 6 years, and both times it had been the specific, deliberate effort of a man doing something outside his comfort zone because he wanted to, which was a version of him she had always loved. She wondered what he was going to make. She wondered what he was going to say. She went to her meeting. Dylan did not answer her that night. Not because he was refusing. She could see that clearly, could read the difference between a man declining to answer and a man genuinely sitting with a question that is larger than his immediate capacity to answer it honestly. And what she saw in her husband at the kitchen island was the second thing. He sat with it. He ate the dinner she cooked, pasta with the roasted tomato sauce she made from scratch when she needed to think, the specific, meditative work of it, the smell filling the kitchen with the warm authority of something real. And he was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet, the quiet of a man who has run out of the specific kind of noise he had been making and found, in the absence of it, something he was not sure what to do with yet. She did not push. This was her discipline, the same discipline she applied to volatile portfolios, the understanding that some processes needed time and that forcing resolution before it was ready produced worse outcomes than waiting for the natural movement of things. She had asked the question. She had meant it. She was prepared to wait for the answer that was worth having rather than accept the answer that was merely fast. They cleaned up together in the kitchen, the ordinary, domestic choreography of two people who have done this for 6 years, who know each other's movements in this space well enough to navigate without collision, and the ordinariness of it was its own kind of information. The way ordinary things are always information if you're paying the right kind of attention. She went to bed at 10:30. He was still at the island when she left the kitchen. She did not ask him to come to bed. She did not perform the concerned wife, the waiting wife, the wife who needs her husband to process on her timeline rather than his own. She was Nadia Okafor, and she had been building things from the ground since she was 22 years old, and she had learned a long time ago that the most important things you build require you to let them take the time they take. She read for 40 minutes. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark in the bedroom of the house she had bought at 28, and she felt, fully and without management, in the privacy of the dark, the weight of the evening. Not the freeze, not the professional complications, not the practical exposure that her financial brain had already mapped and was already quietly organizing responses to. The other weight. The weight of 6 years and a Tuesday evening accusation and the specific, personal cost of being told by the person who should know you best that the love you brought was a calculation. She felt it. She gave it the time it deserved. Then she organized it. Not suppressed it. Organized it. The way she organized difficult information, putting it in the right category, which was not the category of things to survive, but the category of things to understand, because she had decided years ago that understanding was more useful than surviving and more honest than either. She was almost asleep when she heard him come to bed. He lay down beside her in the dark. He did not touch her. She did not turn toward him. But he said, quietly, into the darkness between them, "I don't know why yet, but I'm going to find out." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. And they lay in the dark, 2 feet apart, in the specific, loaded quiet of a marriage that is cracked open and is waiting to find out what it's made of underneath. Wednesday arrived with the full, indifferent efficiency of a city that does not pause for personal difficulty. Nadia was at her desk at Mercer Financial by 7:45. She had moved from the advisory firm 3 years ago to found her own, which was a fact Dylan knew and had celebrated and had filed in the cabinet. And she moved through her morning with the focused, productive attention of a woman who understands that her clients' financial lives do not reorganize themselves around her personal ones. By 9, she had returned 6 emails and reviewed the overnight market movement and had a 30-minute call with a client in Seattle about his Q4 positioning. By 10, she had done the thing she had been thinking about since the kitchen counter the night before. The thing that was not strategy and not revenge and not even, precisely, generosity, but the specific, honest action of a woman who has decided that the clearest thing she can do right now is make the truth visible. She called her accountant. His name was Robert Tate, 61, a Chicago man who had been managing Nadia's books since she started the firm, meticulous and discreet in the way of professionals who understand that their value is not merely technical but relational. She trusted him the way she trusted her best analysts, completely, on the basis of demonstrated evidence. "Robert," she said, "I need a full financial summary. Everything. The firm's position, my personal accounts, the house valuation, the investment portfolio." She paused. "I need it formatted clearly. Something a non-financial person can read and understand completely." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Complete disclosure document," he said. "Yes. Can I ask the purpose?" "My husband needs to understand what he married," she said. A brief pause. "I'll have it to you by end of day," Robert said. Dylan called at 11:15. She was between meetings, the specific, narrow window of 8 minutes between a client call and an internal portfolio review, and she answered because she had decided, in the dark the night before, that she was not going to perform unavailability. She was not a woman who used her schedule as a weapon. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. How's your morning? Productive, she said. Yours? A pause that carried the specific weight of a man whose morning has been the opposite of productive, who has been sitting with something since last night and has been carrying it through a workday that requires him to be the senior VP, to be competent and decisive and present, while simultaneously being a man who said something to his wife at a kitchen counter that he cannot unsay, and is now living in the space created by the unsaying. I've been thinking, he said. I know, she said. Can we tonight? Can we talk tonight? Actually talk. Yes, she said. I'll be home by 7. I'll make dinner, he said. She paused. Okay, she said. She ended the call. She sat for a moment at her desk with her phone in her hand and looked at the Chicago skyline through the office window, the gray November sky and the lake just visible between the buildings, the city going about its Wednesday with the particular, productive stoicism of a place that had been built by people who worked. She thought about Dylan making dinner. He cooked rarely, not because he couldn't, but because the kitchen had, over 6 years, become hers in the way that spaces become a person's when they are used with consistent, genuine investment. He made eggs on Sunday mornings sometimes. He grilled in summer. He had made her birthday dinner twice in 6 years, and both times it had been the specific, deliberate effort of a man doing something outside his comfort zone because he wanted to, which was a version of him she had always loved. She wondered what he was going to make. She wondered what he was going to say. She went to her meeting. Robert Tate's document arrived at 4:47. She read it at her desk with the focused, unhurried attention she gave to all important documents, not scanning, reading, every line, every figure, the full picture assembled on 22 pages with Robert's characteristic precision, the numbers clean and unambiguous, the picture they painted together comprehensive and unequivocal. Her net worth was on page 1. She looked at it with the detached familiarity of a woman who knows her own numbers the way she knows her own name. She thought about Dylan's expression in the kitchen when he said about 4,000. She thought about the specific, architectural irony of a man who had accused his wife of marrying him for money, discovering, in the same evening, that the financial ground of their shared life had always been hers. She printed 2 copies. She put one in her bag. She left the other on her desk. She was home at 6:58. The smell reached her before she opened the door fully. Something serious, something that had been cooking for a while, the specific smell of a meal made with attention, with the investment of time that distinguishes cooking from assembling. She stood in the entryway for a moment with her coat still on and identified it. Her mother's jollof rice recipe. She had taught it to him in the 2nd year of their marriage on a Saturday afternoon. The 2 of them in this kitchen, his hands following her instructions with the focused, genuine attention of a man who was learning something because he wanted to and not because he was asked, and he had written the recipe in his phone, and she had forgotten about it until this moment, standing in the entryway of her house, smelling her mother's recipe in the November evening. She hung up her coat. She walked to the kitchen doorway. Dylan was at the stove. He had the recipe open on his phone on the counter. She could see the screen from the doorway, the Notes app, her handwriting photographed years ago, and he was working with the careful, focused attention of a man who is doing something that matters and knows it, checking the screen and adjusting. The specific quality of someone who is paying complete attention. He turned when he heard her. He looked at her with the unguarded, unmanaged expression that had been appearing more frequently since Tuesday evening. The expression of a man who has been stripped, by circumstances and by the quality of his wife's honesty, of the performance he had been maintaining, and who was finding that what was underneath the performance was not less than he feared, but more complicated than he had been prepared for. Hi, he said. Hi, she said. It's your mother's recipe, he said. I know it's not as good as yours. But I know, she said. I can smell it. She came into the kitchen. She set her bag on the counter. She stood beside him at the stove and looked at the pot, the deep red of the tomatoes and the specific color that jollof achieved when it was done right, which was not quite, but was closer than she expected, and she felt the thing she had been feeling since the dark the night before, the inconvenient, persistent thing. Can I help? She said. He looked at her. I think I need about 10 more minutes, he said. I might have, the rice might need. Move, she said, not unkindly. He moved. She adjusted the heat. She tasted. She added 2 things without measuring them. the way her mother had always cooked, by knowledge rather than formula. And she stirred, and she stood at the stove in her kitchen, and she let the ordinariness of it do what ordinariness did when you were in the middle of something serious, which was remind you that the serious thing was happening to people who were also just people, who also just needed to eat, who were also just standing in a kitchen trying to figure out how to be honest with each other. Nadia, Dylan said. She kept stirring. I've been thinking since last night, he said. About your question. About why I needed to believe. He stopped. He started again, with the specific, effortful quality of a man finding words for something he has spent a long time not finding words for. I have watched you. For 3 years, since you started the firm, I have watched you become something that I don't have I can't, he pressed on. You walk into rooms, and the rooms change. You don't even notice it happening. You've stopped noticing it because it's just what you are. It's just how you move through the world. He paused. And I have been standing next to you in those rooms for 3 years thinking, why is she here? With me? Why does she stay? Nadia kept her eyes on the pot. And instead of asking you, he said, I built an answer. I built one that made your staying make sense to me. That made it logical, transactional, something I could understand without having to believe that you just... He stopped. His voice was rough. That you just loved me, as I was, which felt too large to be true and too important to risk examining. The kitchen was very quiet. The jollof was almost ready. So you build a case, she said. Yes, he said. From your own insecurity. Yes. And you presented it to me as an accusation. Yes. The word was quiet and costly and undefended. And I am. Nadia, I know there is no. I have something for you, she said. She turned off the heat. She went to her bag. She took out Robert Tate's document. She set it on the counter in front of Dylan. He looked at it. What is this? He said. Read the first page, she said. He picked it up. He read. She watched his face. She watched him read her net worth on page 1, and she watched the number land on him. Not with the expression she had feared she might feel satisfaction at, which would have been the expression of a diminished man, but with the expression of a man receiving information that is restructuring his understanding of the last 6 years from the ground up, the specific, comprehensive expression of someone whose story has just been handed a fact it cannot incorporate without becoming a different story. He turned to page 2. He kept reading. She served the jollof. She put the plates on the table. She sat down. She waited for him to finish. He built a case from his own fear and called it a conclusion. She built a firm from zero and called it Tuesday. Drop a comment right now. Tell me which page of that document hit hardest. Tell me if you've ever loved someone who couldn't believe they deserved it. He read all 22 pages. She ate her jollof and watched the November dark outside the kitchen window and let him read. Let the document do what documents do when they carry the weight of a life built carefully over years, which is speak with the specific authority of things that cannot be argued with, the authority of numbers and dates, and the accumulated, documented evidence of a woman who had been building in the quiet for 11 years while the people around her filed her in categories that didn't fit. He turned the last page. He set the document down. He looked at his plate. He had not eaten. The jollof was cooling in the November kitchen, and Dylan Mercer was sitting across from his wife with 22 pages of her financial life in front of him and the specific, unguarded expression of a man who has been handed a mirror at an angle he has never seen himself from before and is finding the view considerably more difficult than the angles he had chosen. The house, he said. Bought at 28, she said. 3 years before we met. The firm. Founded 3 years into our marriage, she said. With capital I had been accumulating since I was 22. My capital. My risk. The portfolio. Built position by position since my first year at the advisory firm, she said. $900 in a brokerage account and 11 years of disciplined reinvestment. He looked at the document. He looked at the first page again. The number at the top, the net worth figure that Robert Tate had calculated with his characteristic precision. The number that was not large in the way of inherited wealth, not large in the way of a single windfall, but large in the specific and more significant way of something built dollar by dollar from nothing by a woman who had decided at 22 that zero was a starting point and not a sentence. Dylan, she said. He looked up. Say what you're thinking, she said. The real version, not the managed one. He pressed both hands flat on the table, the gesture she had come to recognize as his body's way of finding ground when the ground was uncertain. I feel like an idiot, he said. That's not what I'm looking for, she said. I know. He paused. He pressed on. I have been sitting in this house for 6 years believing that my position here was, that I brought the financial foundation and you brought. He stopped. He shook his head. I don't even know what I thought you brought. That's the part one can't. I can't get to the bottom of it. Try, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen held them both. The amber light, the cooling jollof, the 22 pages on the table, the November wind consistent at the window. I think, he said slowly, with the specific, effortful honesty of a man finding his way through a thought he has been avoiding, that I believed you were less. In the practical sense, that your career was good, but that mine was the one that mattered more in the way this city measures things. That I was the one with the real position, the real access, the real. He stopped. The real money, she said. Yes, he said quietly. And when that stopped being true, it was already not true, he said. It was never true. I built the story before I had the facts, and then I protected the story instead of looking for the facts. He looked at her directly. That's what I did. For 3 years I watched you become. He gestured toward the document. This, and instead of being proud of you, instead of standing next to you and saying this is my wife, I was protecting a story about myself that your success was quietly making obsolete. His voice was rough. And Tuesday night, I did the worst possible thing you can do with a story you can't protect anymore. You weaponized it, she said. Yes. The kitchen was very quiet. Nadia looked at her husband across the table, across the 22 pages, and the cooling jollof, and the 6 years, and the Tuesday evening accusation, and the Wednesday of reckoning, and the specific, costly honesty of the last 60 seconds. She felt the love, the inconvenient, persistent, entirely real love, sitting in her chest alongside the hurt, and she held both of them with the clear-eyed honesty she brought to everything, refusing to let either one cancel the other because they were both true and the truth was what she had decided to build the next thing in. The accounts, she said. How long realistically? The compliance team says 6 to 8 weeks minimum, he said. Could extend to 4 months if the inquiry escalates to a full investigation. He paused. I'm not the subject. But until it resolves. You have $4,000, she said. Yes. She looked at him. I'm not going to let my husband's mortgage payment bounce, she said. I want to be clear that I am not doing this as a transaction, not as leverage, not as a demonstration of power. I am doing it because we are married and because the practical problem has a practical solution and because what I need from you has nothing to do with money. He looked at her. What do you need from me? He said. Therapy, she said immediately. Starting next week. Not because our marriage is broken, because it has a specific, identifiable structural problem that has been building for 3 years and that neither of us has had the right language for, and I am not willing to wait for it to produce another Tuesday evening. She held his gaze. I need you to be willing to sit in a room with a professional and examine the story you built and understand where it came from and dismantle it properly. Not just apologize for the accusation. Dismantle the architecture underneath it. Dylan was very still. Yes, he said. And I need you to tell me something true, she said. Right now? Not about the accusation. About us. About why you stayed. Because I told you why I married you. And I meant it. And now I need to hear. Not the performance. Dylan, the real thing. Why you are still sitting at this table. He looked at her. He looked at her with the full, undefended attention of a man who has spent 6 years in the same room as an extraordinary woman and has been looking at his own reflection instead of at her, and who is now, for the first time, actually looking. Because you are the most honest person I have ever known, he said. Because you have never once, not in 6 years, been anything other than exactly what you are, and I have been so busy protecting my story that I turned your honesty into evidence against you instead of understanding it as the greatest thing you ever gave me. His voice was steady and completely unmanaged. Because you cooked dinner after I said what I said on Tuesday. Because you made me read 22 pages that humbled me completely, and then you served me my mother-in-law's recipe and let me find my way to the truth instead of forcing me there. He held her eyes. Because I love you. Not the version of you that fit my story. You. And I have been a coward about it for 3 years, and I am done being a coward about it. The kitchen was very quiet. Nadia looked at her husband. She reached across the 22 pages. She put her hand on his. "Eat your jollof," she said. Something broke open in his expression, not dramatically, not with the excess of a man performing relief, but the small, real, specific fracture of a man who has been holding something very tight for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down. He picked up his fork. He ate. And in the November kitchen of the house she had built, they ate her mother's recipe together in the amber light. And it was not resolved, and it was not healed, and it was not the end of the difficult work, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was, she understood, with the clear-eyed certainty of a woman who had built everything she had from zero, exactly where you had to start. He finally looked at her instead of his reflection. "Drop a comment right now. Tell me which sentence broke you open. Tell me if you've ever loved someone who turned your honesty into evidence." We are one act away from what they build next. The therapist's name was Dr. Sandra Obi. She had an office on Michigan Avenue, the 14th floor, a corner suite with a view of the lake that on clear days was the specific, deep blue of Lake Michigan in winter, the color of something honest and very cold and entirely itself. She was 56, Nigerian-American, with the particular quality of attention that the best therapists develop over decades of sitting with people in the most difficult rooms of their lives. Not warm exactly, not clinical exactly, but present in a way that made the room feel safe for true things. Nadia had found her through a colleague who had said only, "She doesn't let you hide." This had been the recommendation Nadia needed. They had their first session on a Thursday evening 2 weeks after the Tuesday that had cracked everything open, and they had been going every Thursday since. And it was now February, 3 months of Thursdays, 3 months of the specific, uncomfortable, necessary work of two people examining a structure they had built together and finding, with professional guidance, all the places where the foundation had been poured wrong. Dylan had done the work. This was the thing Nadia had been watching for, not the performance of the work, not the showing up to sessions and saying the right things and going home unchanged, but the actual work, the kind that happens between sessions in the ordinary Tuesday and Wednesday of a life, the kind that shows up not in declarations but in behavior. He had shown up. 3 months of Thursdays and the daily small evidence of a man rebuilding himself from a more honest foundation. The way he talked about her work now, not with the performative pride of a man demonstrating security, but with the genuine, curious interest of someone who had finally decided to actually understand what she did. He asked questions, real ones. He sat with her on Sunday mornings when she read the market analysis and asked what she was thinking and listened to the answer with the quality of attention she had first noticed in him at the Kovacs Gallery on a February evening 6 years ago, the quality that had started everything. He had been in therapy individually as well. This had been Dr. Obi's recommendation after the 4th session, that Dylan needed individual work alongside their couple sessions, work on the specific, deep-rooted architecture of a man who had converted his wife's excellence into a threat rather than a gift, which had roots, Dr. Obi had said with the precise, unsparing honesty she brought to everything, that went back considerably further than Nadia. He had started individual sessions the following week. He had not told Nadia what he was working on in them. She had not asked. She trusted the process the way she trusted well-researched investment theses, not blindly, but based on evidence, and the evidence was in the daily texture of a marriage that was becoming, 3 months into the honest rebuilding of it, something different from what it had been, something better. Not easier, better. The distinction mattered. Easy was what they had performed for 3 years. Better was what they were building now, with the full information of who they actually were and the full acknowledgement of where they had actually failed, and better required the daily, unglamorous, entirely unsexy work of two people choosing honesty over comfort every time the choice presented itself. They were choosing it. The accounts were unfrozen in the first week of February. The SEC inquiry had concluded its preliminary investigation and found no basis for action at the fund level. The counterparty transaction that had triggered the inquiry had cleared compliance review, and the hold was lifted on a Monday morning, Dylan's bank calling at 9:47 to confirm that all 3 accounts were accessible. He called Nadia at 9:48. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "I got the compliance alert." She paused. "Robert monitors these things." A brief silence. Then Dylan laughed. The real laugh. The one she had always loved. The unguarded one. "Of course he does," he said. "Are you okay?" she said. "Yes," he said. And then, with the honesty that had become the new operating language of their marriage, relieved, and aware that the relief is complicated. Complicated how? Because the last 3 months, having to sit with the exposure, having to be the one without the floor, it was the most useful thing that has happened to me in years. He paused. I don't mean I'm glad it happened. I mean I understand something now that I didn't understand before, and the understanding cost something, and I think the cost was appropriate. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Dr. Obi would be proud of that sentence, she said. Dr. Obi would say I'm intellectualizing, he said. She'd push for the feeling underneath. What's the feeling underneath? Gratitude, he said simply. For a wife who cooked dinner. On a Sunday morning in late February, Nadia found him in her home office. She had come downstairs early, the specific, pre-dawn alertness of a woman whose brain starts before her alarm, who had learned to work with this rather than against it. And she had expected to find the ground floor quiet and dark, and had instead found the office light on and Dylan at her desk. Not at her computer. At her desk with a legal pad and a pen, writing something by hand in the focused, unhurried way of someone doing something that matters. She stood in the doorway. He looked up. I'm sorry, he said. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to wake you. What are you doing, she said. He looked at the legal pad. Writing something down, he said. Dr. Obi gave me an exercise. She asked me to write, to describe my wife. Not her accomplishments. Her. He paused. Who she is. What she does when she's in a room. What she was doing when I first saw her. He held up the legal pad. 12 pages, she could see from the doorway. I've been here for 2 hours. Nadia looked at her husband in her office chair at her desk in her house at 5:30 in the morning, 12 pages into a description of who she was. She felt the love, not the inconvenient, persistent version she had been carrying through the difficult months, but the full version, the one with room to breathe, the one that had been there the whole time underneath the hurt and the work and the 3 months of Thursdays. She came into the office. She sat on the edge of the desk. Read me something, she said. He looked at the legal pad. He found a page. He read. She stands at a stove and the kitchen becomes a different room. Not because of what she's cooking, because of the quality of attention she brings to it. The same attention she brings to a portfolio, to a difficult conversation, to a person who needs to be heard. She doesn't divide herself. She is always entirely present for the thing in front of her, and the thing in front of her is always lucky for it. The office was very quiet. The February dark was at the window. Nadia looked at her husband reading his own words about her and felt them land. Not as performance, not as the managed remorse she had declined at the kitchen counter 3 months ago, but as the real thing, the seen thing, the specific and irreplaceable experience of being looked at properly by the person who chose you. Dylan, she said. He looked up. That's the man I married, she said. Right there. That's him. He set the legal pad down. He looked at her, fully, with the complete, undivided, gallery window quality of attention that had started everything 6 years ago. And she looked back, and between them was 12 pages of a husband finally seeing his wife and 3 months of Thursday work and a Tuesday evening that had cracked something open that had needed to be open, and the February dark outside the window of a house she had built from zero that was now, fully and without ambiguity, theirs. He reached out. She took his hand. Outside, Chicago was doing what it did in February. The lake effect moving through the dark streets. The city receiving it with the stoic grace of a place built by people who understood that the most important things you build are not the ones that avoid the hard weather, but the ones that hold through it. The house held. They held. That was enough. That was, Nadia Okafor understood, with the clear-eyed certainty of a woman who had built everything she had from zero and knew what a solid foundation felt like. Exactly everything. 6 months later, Dylan Mercer walked into a room at a Chicago financial symposium and introduced himself to the room as the husband of Nadia Okafor. Not Mercer Financial, not his wife, not Dylan Mercer's wife, Nadia Okafor, managing director, and the room turned toward her the way rooms turn toward her, and he stood beside her and watched it happen and felt, for the first time, not threatened by it, but completed by it, the specific and hard-won pride of a man who has done the work to deserve standing next to something extraordinary. Dr. Obi heard about it the following Thursday. She nodded once. She said, now we're getting somewhere. She was right. They were. Some foundations look like nothing until you understand what was built on them. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what this story gave you. Tell me what you're building. Tell me who you're building it with, and whether they know the full size of what they're standing on. This story was for everyone who ever built something real and was told it didn't count, and stayed anyway, and kept building. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.